The last time Kaiser had eaten a real meal, the maple tree in the front yard still wore its summer dress of green. Now those same leaves crunched beneath the weight of strangers' footsteps, their golden bodies surrendering to November's relentless march toward winter. He could count his ribs when he stretched, each one a sharp reminder of the promises he'd made to shadows that no longer answered when he called. The house knew he was dying. He could feel it in the way the floorboards settled more quietly beneath his paws, as if even the bones of this place were trying to cushion his final days. The water bowl sat empty beside the back door, had been empty since the first frost painted silver across the kitchen windows. Kaiser had learned to catch rainwater in his mouth during the storms that rattled the loose gutters, had discovered which neighbors threw out leftover hamburger meat on Tuesday nights. But those small mercies were no longer enough to sustain the 110 pounds of loyalty that refused to abandon this threshold. Memory was his cruelest companion during the long afternoons when sunlight slanted through dust-heavy air. He remembered Emma's small hands buried deep in his fur as she whispered secrets only dogs were trusted to keep. He remembered David's weekend morning ritual of pancakes and burned bacon, how the smoke detector would shriek its protest while Emma giggled and Kaiser waited patiently for the inevitable dropped sausage. He remembered the weight of David's hand on his head during those final weeks, when the man grew thin and quiet, when hushed phone calls replaced bedtime stories, when Emma's laughter became as rare as summer snow. The memories lived in layers throughout the house. Emma's bedroom still held the faint scent of her strawberry shampoo, trapped in the carpet fibers where she used to sit cross-legged, brushing Kaiser's coat while reciting spelling words. The living room corner where David's recliner once sat remained Kaiser's favorite resting spot, as if some ghost of warmth still emanated from those worn floorboards. Even now, as his body trembled with exhaustion and his stomach clenched with hunger, Kaiser would position himself there each evening, watching the front door with the same unwavering attention he'd given it for 3 months and 17 days. The neighbors had developed a routine around his vigil. Mrs. Patterson from across the street would peer through her lace curtains each morning, her face creased with worry and something that looked like admiration. The mailman, Rodriguez, had started leaving small strips of beef jerky beside the mailbox, offerings that Kaiser accepted with dignified gratitude before returning to his post, but their kindness came wrapped in expiration dates. He'd overheard enough whispered conversations to understand that patience had limits, that love without legal standing meant nothing to the authorities who would eventually come. The for sale sign had weathered into something almost abstract. Its bright red letters faded to the color of dried roses. Realtors came and went like seasonal birds, their voices carrying through the walls in fragments that Kaiser had learned to decode. Health department, they would say, and liability, and always, eventually, animal control. But between their visits, the silence would return, and with it, the space for hope to breathe and stretch and convince him that footsteps on gravel might still mean the impossible. It was during one of those suspended moments, when afternoon light painted golden rectangles across the empty living room, that Kaiser heard it. Not footsteps. He would have recognized those immediately, but something softer, something that made his heart stutter and his ears prick forward with an attention that transcended the physical world. A voice, barely audible above the whisper of wind through bare branches, calling his name. Kaiser. The word hung in the air like a prayer answered, and for the first time in months, Kaiser's tail moved. Not the full ecstatic wag of his youth, but a tentative tremor that sent shockwaves through his entire frame. He lifted his massive head, amber eyes focusing on the front door with an intensity that could have melted steel. The voice came again, stronger this time, carrying with it the unmistakable cadence of someone who had once whispered goodnight stories into his fur. "Kaiser, are you there?" He was on his feet before conscious thought could interfere, muscle memory overriding the weakness that had become his constant companion. His nails clicked against hardwood as he moved toward the entryway, each step an act of faith that defied every rational fiber of his being. Through the frosted glass of the front door, a silhouette took shape, taller than he remembered, but carrying the same slight tilt to the left shoulder, the same hesitant posture that had always preceded requests for comfort. When the door opened, the world collapsed and expanded simultaneously. Emma stood framed in the doorway, 16 years old and beautiful in the way that heartbreak makes people beautiful. Sharp edges where softness used to live, eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who should still believe in fairy tales. Her dark hair was longer now, pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the delicate architecture of cheekbones that had emerged during their time apart. But it was her hands that broke Kaiser's heart all over again. They were shaking as they reached toward him, trembling with the kind of emotional earthquake that comes from touching something you thought was lost forever. "Oh God, Kaiser. Oh my God." Her voice cracked on his name, and then she was falling to her knees on the threshold, arms opening to receive the full weight of his devotion. Kaiser buried his face in the curve of her neck, breathing in the scent that had lived in his dreams for 97 days. She smelled different now, older, sadder, carrying traces of unfamiliar places and people, but underneath it all was the essential Emma-ness that no amount of time or distance could erase. They held each other in the doorway as November wind stirred the leaves around them, neither willing to break the spell of reunion by speaking first. Kaiser felt Emma's tears dampening his fur, felt the way her fingers traced the sharp ridges of his ribs with growing horror. She was cataloging his transformation the same way he was cataloging hers, measuring the cost of separation in pounds and angles and the new geography of grief etched into familiar features. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against his ear, the words tumbling out in a rush of anguish and explanation. "I tried to come sooner. I tried to find a way to take you with me, but the apartment complex has a no-pets policy, and Mom's already struggling with rent, and I thought maybe someone would adopt you, would give you a better life than I could, and I didn't know. Kaiser, I didn't know you were still here. The apartment. The no-pets policy. The crushing weight of adult decisions forced upon someone who should still be worried about algebra tests and prom dates." Kaiser understood, even as his heart shattered with the understanding. Emma had made the choice that love sometimes demands, the choice to let go rather than watch something precious suffer. But love, Kaiser had learned during his months of vigil, was not always reasonable. Sometimes it demanded the impossible. Sometimes it insisted on waiting. As they moved inside together, Emma's eyes swept across the empty rooms with a mixture of recognition and devastation. The house had been stripped of everything that made it home. Furniture sold, photographs packed away, even the kitchen curtains removed to reveal bare windows that let in too much light. Only the bones remained, and Kaiser's presence haunting every corner like a guardian spirit who refused to acknowledge that his watch was over. "Dad would have loved this," Emma said, her voice barely audible as they settled together on the living room floor. "You staying here waiting for us? He always said you were the most loyal dog in the world, that you'd probably wait forever if someone asked you to." She paused, her hand stilling in Kaiser's fur as the implications of her words settled between them. But I can't ask you to wait anymore, buddy. Tomorrow morning, animal control is coming. Mrs. Patterson called them because she's worried about you, and they're going to take you to the shelter." And the sentence hung unfinished in the air between them, its meaning clear enough without the cruelty of completion. Kaiser pressed closer to Emma's side, feeling the tension radiating from her small frame like heat from a fever. She was trying to be strong, trying to make the adult decisions that had been forced upon her too early. But he could sense the rebellion brewing beneath her composed exterior. He could see it in the way her jaw set with familiar determination, could feel it in the subtle shift of her posture from resignation to resolution. "No," she said suddenly, the word sharp enough to cut through the gathering twilight. "No, I'm not letting them take you. Not after you waited all this time. Not after you've been so good, so perfect, so loyal." She scrambled to her feet with sudden purpose, her movements charged with the kind of electric energy that precedes life-changing decisions. "We're leaving. Right now. Tonight. I don't know where we'll go or how we'll manage, but I'm not abandoning you again." Kaiser rose to follow her as she moved through the house with newfound determination, gathering the few items she'd brought with her. A worn backpack, a thermos of water, a bag of dog food that looked pitifully small against the magnitude of what they were attempting. But as they prepared to leave the only home Kaiser had ever known, he felt something shift inside his chest. Not the physical weakness that had plagued him for weeks, but something deeper, a loosening of the anchors that had held him to this place, a recognition that home had never been about walls and windows and the familiar creak of floorboards. Home had always been Emma. They slipped out through the back door as the last light faded from the western sky, Two figures moving through shadows with the practiced stealth of those who had learned to navigate a world that didn't always have space for their kind of love. Kaiser's legs trembled with each step, but Emma's presence beside him was like a transfusion of purpose, giving him strength he didn't know he still possessed. Behind them, the empty house settled into darkness, finally releasing its hold on the guardian who had kept faith with its ghosts for longer than anyone had a right to expect. The city at night was a different creature than the one that existed during daylight hours. Neon signs painted the sidewalks in electric blues and pinks, while the homeless made their evening migrations toward doorways and heating grates and the temporary kindness of late-night diners. Emma and Kaiser moved through this landscape like refugees from a war that no one else could see, seeking shelter in the spaces between the official world's attention. They found sanctuary in Riverside Park, where the old gazebo provided some protection from the wind that had begun to carry the first hints of snow. Emma spread her jacket across the wooden bench, creating a nest of sorts where Kaiser could rest his increasingly unsteady legs. She rationed the dog food like an experienced survivalist, mixing it with water from the thermos to create a gruel that would be easier for Kaiser to digest and would last longer than the kibble alone. "I have a plan," she told him as they huddled together against the November cold, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. "There's a woman, Dr. Chen, who runs a vet clinic across town. She helped Dad when you were a puppy, remember? When you got into that chocolate cake and we thought—" Her voice caught slightly on the memory. "She was so kind to us then, even though we couldn't pay much. Maybe she'll help us now. Maybe she'll know someone who can take us both. Or maybe she'll let us work at the clinic in exchange for food and medical care." Kaiser rested his heavy head against Emma's thigh, feeling the rapid pulse of her heart through the thin fabric of her jeans. She was scared. He could smell it on her skin, sharp and metallic like copper pennies, but underneath the fear was something stronger. Determination. Hope. The same stubborn optimism that had once convinced her she could teach Kaiser to fetch her slippers and balance treats on his nose, and be the best dog in the whole wide world. The night stretched endlessly around them, punctuated by the distant sounds of traffic and sirens and the occasional burst of laughter from groups of teenagers who had no idea that love could require such desperate measures. Kaiser dozed fitfully, his sleep broken by waves of nausea and the sharp pain that had begun to radiate from his chest down his front legs. Each breath felt like work now, each heartbeat a conscious effort rather than the automatic rhythm that had sustained him through 3 months of faithful waiting. When dawn finally began to paint the eastern horizon in pale shades of pink and gold, Emma stirred beside him, her movements stiff from cold and the uncomfortable angles of sleeping on a park bench. She looked older in the morning light, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry, but her eyes still held the fierce determination that had carried them through the night. "Time to go." "Buddy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from cold and unshed tears. "Dr. Chen opens her clinic at 7. If we leave now, we can be there when she arrives." The walk across town became a marathon of will over weakness. Kaiser's legs buckled twice before they reached the main road, his breathing shallow and labored in a way that made Emma's face go pale with panic. But each time he stumbled, he found the strength to rise again, driven by the simple truth that Emma needed him to keep going. Love, he had learned, was not about the absence of fear or pain. It was about moving forward despite them. Dr. Sarah Chen's veterinary clinic sat wedged between a Korean barbecue restaurant and a used bookstore, its modest storefront marked only by a simple sign that read, "Healing Paws Animal Hospital." Emma and Kaiser waited in the pre-dawn shadows across the street, watching for signs of life behind the darkened windows. When a small silver Honda pulled into the parking space in front of the clinic at exactly 6:45 a.m., Emma squeezed Kaiser's neck gently. "That's her," she breathed. "I remember that car. She drove us home that night when you ate the chocolate, remember?" Dr. Chen was smaller than Kaiser remembered, her black hair now streaked with premature silver, but her movements carried the same calm efficiency that had once soothed a frantic David and a sobbing 6-year-old Emma. She was fumbling with her keys when Emma called out to her across the empty street. "Dr. Chen?" "Excuse me, Dr. Chen." The veterinarian looked up, her dark eyes scanning the shadows until they found Emma and Kaiser emerging from their hiding place. Kaiser saw the moment of recognition cross her face, followed immediately by professional concern as she took in his emaciated condition and Emma's obvious distress. Emma Martinez? Dr. Chen's voice carried a mixture of surprise and growing alarm. Is that really you? And Kaiser? She crossed the street quickly, her trained eye already cataloging the signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration that Kaiser's body displayed like a medical textbook. Honey, what's happened?
Where's your father?
The question hit Emma like a physical blow, and Kaiser felt her body stiffen beside him as she struggled to find words for a truth too large to fit comfortably in any explanation. He died, she said finally, the words coming out flat and stark in the morning air. 6 months ago, cancer. Everything fell apart after that. The house, the bills, everything. I had to give Kaiser up because our new place doesn't allow pets, but he never left the old house. He's been waiting there for 3 months, and now he's sick, and animal control was coming this morning, and I just couldn't let them take him. Dr. Chen's expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession. Shock, grief, professional assessment, and finally, a kind of gentle determination that Kaiser remembered from their previous encounters. She knelt beside him in the middle of the empty street, her small hands moving expertly over his frame as she conducted a preliminary examination that confirmed what they all already knew. He's in bad shape, she said softly, her voice carefully neutral in the way that medical professionals learn to deliver difficult news. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, and from the sound of his breathing, possibly some cardiac complications from the stress and poor nutrition. We need to get him inside immediately. The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Dr. Chen transformed from concerned stranger to medical advocate to something approaching a guardian angel. She carried Kaiser into the clinic herself when his legs finally gave out completely, her small frame somehow managing to support his weight as Emma held the doors open. The examination room smelled like antiseptic and hope, its bright lights revealing the true extent of Kaiser's deterioration in unforgiving detail. "I'm going to be honest with you," Dr. Chen said as she prepared an IV line to begin immediate fluid replacement. "He's been living on determination and loyalty for longer than his body should have allowed. His blood pressure is dangerously low, he's lost almost 30% of his body weight, and his heart is showing signs of significant stress. Under normal circumstances, with a dog in this condition..." She paused, her hands never stopping their skilled ministrations. Most veterinarians would recommend euthanasia as the kindest option. The word hit the small examination room like a grenade, and Kaiser felt Emma's entire world contract around its implications. She was 16 years old, alone in the world except for relatives who had already proven they couldn't accommodate the complications of her love for a dying dog. She had no money, no legal authority, no power except the fierce determination that had driven her to sleep in a park rather than abandon the promise she'd made to a loyal heart. "But these aren't normal circumstances," Dr. Chen continued, her voice gentling as she saw Emma's face crumple with despair. "This dog has survived 3 months of conditions that should have killed him weeks ago. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because he has something to live for." She looked directly at Emma then, her dark eyes holding a warmth that Kaiser remembered from years before. "The question is, do you have something to fight for?" Emma's answer came without hesitation, delivered with the kind of absolute certainty that can only exist in hearts too young to fully understand the magnitude of what they're promising. "Yes, I'll do anything. Work here, clean kennels, whatever you need. Just please, please don't let him die." Dr. Chen nodded once, sharply, as if Emma's response had confirmed something she'd already decided. "Then we're going to try something that might not work, will definitely be expensive, and will require more dedication than you probably realize you're capable of. But if you're willing to trust me, and if Kaiser is willing to keep fighting, we might just pull off a miracle." The next 72 hours existed outside of normal time, measured not in minutes or hours but in heartbeats and breaths, and the incremental victories of medical intervention against the accumulated damage of prolonged suffering. Kaiser drifted in and out of consciousness as his body processed the IV fluids and medications that Dr. Chen administered with the precision of someone who had spent 20 years fighting battles between life and death. Emma never left his side. She slept curled in the uncomfortable chair beside his kennel, waking every few hours to whisper encouragements and promises into his fur. She learned to read the monitors that tracked his vital signs, became expert at detecting the subtle changes in his breathing that might indicate improvement or decline. Dr. Chen brought her food from the Korean restaurant next door and let her use the clinic's shower. Treating her with the same gentle professionalism she extended to all her patients' families. On the second night, Kaiser's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. His heart rate spiked alarmingly, then dropped to levels that made the monitors scream warnings into the darkened clinic. Emma woke to find Dr. Chen working over Kaiser's still form with controlled urgency, her hands moving in practiced patterns of cardiac resuscitation as she fought to restart the heart that had finally given up its long battle. "Come on, Kaiser," Dr. Chen muttered under her breath, her voice tight with concentration. "Come on, buddy. Don't you dare quit now. Not when she's right here. Not when she needs you to keep fighting." For 37 seconds, Emma counted everyone. Kaiser's heart remained still. His body lay motionless on the examination table, while Dr. Chen worked with the kind of focused intensity that exists only in the space between life and death. Emma held her breath until her lungs burned. Her entire world condensed to the rhythm of compressions and the desperate hope that love might be enough to call a loyal soul back from whatever darkness it was sliding toward. When Kaiser's heart finally resumed its irregular rhythm, the sound filled the small room like a symphony. Dr. Chen stepped back from the table, her face shining with sweat and relief, while Emma collapsed against the wall as her knees gave way beneath her. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The third day dawned gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that seems to seep into everything it touches. Kaiser's vital signs had stabilized during the night, but he remained unconscious, his body fighting battles on multiple fronts as Dr. Chen's medications worked to reverse months of self-imposed starvation and neglect. Emma sat beside his kennel, reading aloud from one of the veterinary journals, her voice providing a constant stream of familiar sound for ears that might or might not be listening. It was just after noon when Kaiser's eyes finally opened, blinking slowly in the fluorescent light as consciousness returned in gradual stages. Emma was the first thing he saw, her face hovering anxiously above his own, and the sight of her triggered something deep in his chest that had nothing to do with medical intervention and everything to do with the simple fact that love had called him back from the edge of forever. "Hey there, buddy," Emma whispered, her voice thick with tears she'd been holding back for 3 days. "Welcome back. We were starting to worry you might have found something more interesting to do." Kaiser tried to lift his head, managed only a slight movement that sent waves of weakness through his frame. But his tail moved, just a flutter against the blanket, but enough to send Emma into tears of relief and joy. Dr. Chen appeared beside them, her professional demeanor unable to completely hide the satisfaction in her eyes as she conducted a quick examination of her patient. "He's not out of the woods yet," she cautioned, but her voice carried a warmth that hadn't been there during the darkest hours of his crisis. "It's going to be weeks of careful recovery, special diet, limited activity, and he'll need ongoing cardiac monitoring for the rest of his life. But," she paused, allowing herself a small smile, "I think he's going to make it. I think you both are." The weeks that followed blurred together in a routine of small victories and careful progress. Emma moved into the small apartment above Dr. Chen's clinic, earning her keep by cleaning kennels, answering phones, and learning the basics of veterinary assistance. Kaiser's recovery was slow but steady, his body gradually remembering what it felt like to be properly nourished and cared for. His coat began to regain its glossy sheen. His eyes brightened with renewed alertness, and most importantly, his tail began to wag with something approaching his old enthusiasm. But the real transformation wasn't physical. As Kaiser's strength returned, so did his sense of purpose, though it had evolved during his months of vigil into something deeper and more nuanced than simple loyalty. He had learned that love was not about clinging to what was, but about embracing what could be. He had discovered that faithfulness sometimes meant letting go, and that the highest form of devotion was helping those you love find their way to happiness, even when that path led away from you. Emma, too, was changing. The scared, overwhelmed 16-year-old who had slept in a park rather than abandon her dog was growing into someone stronger, more confident, more aware of her own capacity for both sacrifice and joy. She threw herself into learning everything Dr. Chen could teach her, discovering a natural aptitude for animal care that surprised them both. She talked about veterinary school now, about building a life that would allow her to help other animals and families facing impossible choices. Dr. Chen, meanwhile, had become something neither Emma nor Kaiser had expected to find: a family member. Not a replacement for what they'd lost, but a new configuration of love that proved hearts could expand rather than simply substitute. She was the one who suggested, as Kaiser's recovery entered its final phase, that perhaps it was time to visit the old house one last time. They drove through Emma's old neighborhood on a crystalline February morning when the world looked newly minted and full of possibilities. The for sale sign was gone, replaced by evidence of new occupancy. Children's toys scattered across the front lawn, warm light glowing behind windows that had been dark for so long. Emma held Kaiser's leash loosely as they walked slowly past the house that had sheltered his vigil, both of them taking measure of how much had changed. "It looks good," Emma said softly, her voice carrying no trace of the grief that had once threatened to consume her. "Happy. Like it's supposed to be full of people again." Kaiser sniffed the air that once carried only his own loneliness, now rich with the sense of new life. Coffee brewing, bacon frying, the distinctive sweetness of children's laughter mixing with morning sunlight. He felt no jealousy, no sense of territorial loss. The house had served its purpose as a keeper of memories, but memories were meant to live in hearts, not walls. A small boy, maybe 5 years old, appeared at the front window and waved enthusiastically at the sight of Kaiser's magnificent form. Emma waved back, and they could see the child tugging on someone's sleeve, pointing excitedly at the beautiful dog who had stopped to visit their new home. In that moment, Kaiser understood something profound about the nature of love and loyalty and the way good things ripple outward in patterns too large for any single heart to comprehend. They returned to Dr. Chen's clinic as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed to promise warmer days ahead. Kaiser had been officially adopted by Emma and Dr. Chen the week before, but more than that, he had found his new purpose. 3 afternoons a week, he worked as a therapy dog at the children's hospital, offering comfort to young patients who understood what it meant to fight battles that seemed too big for small bodies to win. On those days, Kaiser would rest his great head on the beds of children who were learning the same lessons he had learned during his months of vigil. That love was stronger than fear, that loyalty could sustain you through the darkest nights, that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply refuse to give up hope. He was especially drawn to the children who cried for pets they'd left behind, who worried that their absence meant abandonment, who needed to hear that love was patient and love was kind and love would wait as long as it took. Emma would watch from the doorway during these sessions, her heart swelling with pride at the way Kaiser had transformed his own suffering into a gift for others. She was 18 now, accepted to the state university's pre-veterinary program, planning a life that would allow her to build on everything Dr. Chen had taught her about healing and hope and the way broken hearts could become stronger. At the Mended Places, the apartment they shared, above the clinic, was small but warm, filled with the kind of comfortable chaos that comes from 2 people and 1 large dog learning to build a life together. Kaiser's bed was positioned where he could see both the front door and Emma's room, though he rarely slept there anymore. Most nights found him stretched across the foot of Emma's bed, his dreams peaceful and untroubled by the fear that morning might bring another abandonment. On quiet evenings, when the clinic was closed and dinner was finished and Emma was studying for her college entrance exams, Kaiser would rest his head on her lap and listen to the sound of pages turning, the scratch of pencil on paper, the steady rhythm of a young woman building her future one careful step at a time. These were the moments that justified every day of his vigil, every night of cold and hunger, and the terrible faith required to believe that loyalty would eventually find its reward. Sometimes, when the wind was right and the evening carried just the perfect combination of warmth and possibility, Kaiser would catch a scent or hear a sound that transported him back to the empty house where he had learned the deepest truths about love and loss and the courage required to keep believing in tomorrow. But these memories no longer carried the weight of grief. Instead, they had transformed into something like gratitude, appreciation for the journey that had led him here, to this warm apartment, and this beloved girl, and this new understanding of what it meant to be home. Dr. Chen had framed a photo of Kaiser from his therapy dog certification ceremony and hung it in the clinic's waiting room. In the picture, he sat proudly beside a little girl who had been in the hospital for 3 months, both of them wearing matching bandanas and expressions of quiet triumph. Beneath the photo, a small plaque read, Sometimes the greatest loyalty is knowing when to let go, and sometimes the greatest love is learning how to begin again. On the night of Emma's high school graduation, they sat together on the small balcony outside their apartment, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Emma wore her cap and gown, her diploma carefully protected in its leather folder, her acceptance letter to veterinary school folded neatly in her pocket. Kaiser rested beside her chair, his coat gleaming with health and contentment, his amber eyes peaceful as they surveyed their small kingdom. "Do you think Dad would be proud?" Emma asked, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "Do you think he'd understand why we had to leave that house?" Kaiser lifted his head to look at her, seeing in her face the perfect blend of the little girl who had once whispered secrets into his fur and the young woman who had learned to fight for what mattered most. David would have been proud, not just of Emma's achievements, but of the way she had learned to love without clinging, to honor the past without being imprisoned by it, to build something beautiful from the wreckage of loss. The answer came not in words, but in the way Kaiser moved closer to Emma's chair, resting his great head against her knee in a gesture that encompassed everything they had survived together. They sat in comfortable silence as the evening deepened around them, two hearts that had learned to beat in synchronization with hope instead of grief, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. In the distance, the city hummed with the endless motion of lives being lived and dreams being pursued, and love taking new forms in hearts brave enough to remain open despite the risks. Kaiser closed his eyes and listened to the symphony of possibility that surrounded them, knowing that some stories end not with dramatic conclusions, but with the quiet recognition that love, real love, is not about the destination, but about the willingness to keep walking forward together, one faithful step at a time. The house where Kaiser had kept his vigil was filled now with new laughter, new memories, new love learning to take root in soil that had been consecrated by faithful waiting. And in a small apartment above a veterinary clinic, a girl and her dog were building. Tomorrow, on the foundation of everything they had, learned about loyalty and loss and the magnificent resilience of hearts that refused to surrender their capacity for joy. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the courage to start over. Sometimes the most profound act of love is teaching another heart that it's safe to trust in happy endings again. And sometimes, in the space between what was lost and what was found, miracles take the shape of ordinary grace. A warm bed, a full food bowl, a hand that knows exactly where to scratch behind your ears, and the simple revolutionary promise that this time, love gets to stay.